Good day, fellow champions of inclusion. I am AA Ron, and this is the Inclusive Dad Podcast, where we explore inclusion and make it practical. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe, rate, or review the show on your favorite platform. We truly appreciate your feedback and would be honored if you shared the podcast with friends and family who might benefit. If you want to support us in our mission, please click on the link in the show description. Today, my guest is Dr. Julie Pham. Did I say that correctly?
That's fine.
That's fine. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah. Why don't you start us off by just telling me a little bit about yourself?
So, really important part of my identity is I'm a Vietnamese refugee, a boat person. I came with my parents in 1979.
Okay.
They started the first privately owned Vietnamese language newspaper in the Pacific Northwest. So, I think of them as hustlers among hustlers. That's
Yeah.
important because I grew up with entrepreneurs and now I am an entrepreneur. I have my own company called CuriosityBased, which I started 4 years ago in the middle of the pandemic. And we help people practice curiosity in the world, starting in the workplace, because that's where we spend most of our waking hours.
That's great. So 1970, I was born in 77, so so that's
We're both
interesting.
Gen X, kind
There
of
we
late
go.
Gen X.
Late Gen X, yeah. What is your definition of inclusion?
So I think of inclusion through the curiosity lens. So we would define it actually as curiosity-based inclusion.
Okay.
And what that means is people feel safe being able to ask questions at work or
Yeah.
in any setting, not just at work. There's a stat 70% of people say that they face barriers asking questions at work. I think that this is also in outside of work as well. There's a lot of fear around offending people,
Sure.
around how's that question going to be interpreted, and so we don't ask questions. Inclusion to me means that people feel that they can practice curiosity with other people, and they can also practice curiosity with themselves.
Sure. That's interesting.
I
Yeah.
can give you a specific example if
Sure.
that
Go.
helps.
Give
Yes.
me. Yeah.
So for example, the question, where are you from? Now that question, some people can interpret as being offensive, and it particularly depends on who you're asking it to. So for example, asking that question, where are you from, to an Asian American might be, oh, you're othering them. You think that you're assuming that they are foreign. And for me, that question doesn't bother me. I
Hmm.
actually like to be asked that question. And it also signals to me, oh, I can also ask you where you're from. And also the question, where are you from? We can answer it in so many different ways.
Right.
And the impact is going to be different for different people. Different people are going to experience different impacts. Some people will be offended, some people will really lean in, and we don't know. And so in a place where I find that curiosity-based inclusion isn't practiced, is where people feel just afraid of asking the wrong questions, and so they don't ask any questions at
Right.
all. Because I think actually instead of censoring our questions, what we should teach people is, hey, it's actually okay to try to understand the question that someone's asking, to pause, to say, I'm not, I need some more time, or I don't feel quite comfortable. We can actually think about how we respond to the question versus just feeling outraged or furious about the question asked. Because what that signals when we just, oh, I can't believe you asked that question, or we complain to other people, I can't believe
Hmm.
they asked that question. What it signals is we shouldn't ask questions.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was. Yeah, that's kind of where my brain went. Is yeah, I mean, how do people get to the point where they don't want to ask a question? But yeah, that makes sense. Whereas they've gotten a reaction from somebody for a question, now they just don't want to ask a question and get a reaction or offend somebody.
And then they think, oh, I should never ask any Asian
Yeah.
American where they are from.
Right. Yeah.
And we shouldn't apply universal rules
Yeah.
and expect that one person impacted this way represents everyone.
Yeah. So, what made you get started in this curiosity inclusion piece? How did
Hmm.
that start?
Yeah. So I think that there's the what kind of inspired my business, but then even actually my lived experience. So actually, I'll start with my lived experience. Like I
Sure.
said, I grew up Vietnamese at home, American at school, and being bicultural was definitely one aspect of it. I also got to when I did my graduate studies, I got to live in the UK, Germany, France, and Vietnam. And
Mm-hmm.
so in those places, recognizing, oh, we just have different expectations of how we want to be treated. And then I came back after I finished my dissertation, I came back to Seattle to help run my family's Vietnamese newspaper.
Okay.
And there, even just in even the where the newspaper was located was actually at the time named one of the most diverse zip codes in the country. So even
Okay.
just working there, I got to experience lots of different cultures.
Right.
And and so then with the curiosity part, what I realized was when I was in school or as an academic, I thought of curiosity as outward, as accumulating knowledge, as just trying to learn new things. And what I realized when I came back to Seattle and started doing community organizing and working at the newspaper was there's so much we can learn just from one another. And
Right.
I didn't, even though I lived outside the US, I learned so much just by being in this one zip code, 98118 in
Mm-hmm.
Seattle. And then forward how I got to really focusing on curiosity was I was I had created a cross sector collaboration fellowship. So bringing together people from tech slash the private sector, government, and nonprofits.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a 6-month program, and I did this over 5 different cohorts. And what I noticed was that there are people who struggled and there are people who thrived. And the people who struggled were so focused on a particular outcome. They were so fixed on this plan. And the people who really thrived were just, wow, look at what we're learning. I had
Mm-hmm.
no idea. We created something out of nothing. And so what I realized was it was the curiosity part.
Right.
And that was the difference. And what we saw was on any given team, if you had a critical mass of people who were curious, it could uplift the morale of a team. And the inverse was true. If you had a critical mass of people who were just focused on the
Mm-hmm.
outcome, it would take down the morale. And
Hmm.
so, and because there are a lot of bystanders,
Right.
there are a lot of people who are just waiting to see what's the dynamic going to be. And in
Yeah.
any case, that's what got me interested in curiosity because I realized, wow, if we can, how do we help teams do this? Because if we can help them, then that can actually lead to more collaboration, connection,
Sure.
retention at work and elsewhere in our lives.
Yeah. That's great. So part of I have a daughter, 22, with a disability, so she was in special education in school, and part of that is every year you at least once a year you have to have an IEP team meeting. So that's just a meeting where the parents, school staff meet to go over like the document, goals, all that kind of stuff. So as a parent, if I'm coming to a meeting like that, is there a way to kind of tell like can you tell, is there keys or things people like throw off that would tip you off that they are more of the curious or more outcome focused?
Oh, I think at that point we just ask questions and
Okay.
then see how they respond.
Sure.
And I also think part of I've been describing curiosity as a practice. And so I think of curiosity, this practice of curiosity having 3 elements:
Okay.
self-awareness, relationship building, and clear communication.
Sure.
And so that first part, being curious about myself, and the second part is being curious about other people and letting them be curious about me. So
Right.
that point there is not just to ask them questions, also to share parts of myself.
Right.
And so that there's that back and forth, that there's that reciprocity. We can build relationships as you're having the conversations with people to see how they respond.
Right. So yeah, what is and then also that situation, like I mean, I'm a parent when it's for my daughter, I come in very emotional. And I mean, honestly, I do have like an outcome in mind because ours was we wanted her to be more included with her peers. So I'm coming in with kind of an outcome. How do I honor and respect others while being authentic to myself? So how do I, any
So you
tips?
might think that that you have an outcome in mind, which is so that your daughter feels included.
Yep.
There's that big general one. And sometimes when we go into that conversation, we think, and this is how it's going to look like for her to feel included.
Right. Yeah.
And so the part here is, well, maybe they have other ideas of how it could
Right.
look different ways to get there. And so how do we actually move away from, well, I'm going to tell you, I have a problem and I need you to solve it. And this is what the solution looks like versus actually honoring the fact that they have a lot of experience. They've worked with
Yep.
lots of different parents and lots of different kids, and maybe they have different recommendations, and just asking that, "Hey, what do you think? What
Yeah.
does it look like for other people?" Well, and also I think when we ask questions, what we don't realize is how often our questions are, I think of them as compound questions. They actually have multiple assumptions in them. And so to
Mm-hmm.
take a question we have and to and sometimes the question we're asking already has the solution. How are we
Right.
going to get my daughter to feel in included by doing this? Or
Right.
how do we get my
Yeah.
daughter to be included by other people here? And actually, it can be a more open question. We can ask a series of small questions.
Sure. No, that's interesting.
Mhm.
Is that stuff we do like subconsciously? We kind of, I mean, I don't remember. I mean, if I'm asking a question, I don't really think I don't remember myself like thinking ahead of time, how am I going to word this to get a certain outcome? So that must just be stuff we
Oh, it's totally
have to.
subconscious. It's totally
Okay.
and so
Interesting.
to break it up, it requires sometimes what's actually really helpful is talking it through with other people.
Sure.
I really like to practice, especially when I'm feeling super heated
Yeah.
and upset. And so I'll give you an example. I was talking a client made a request, and I interpreted the request in a particular way. And I got really irritated. It's like, I can't believe she's asking me to do that. And I actually even kind of started to write back a slightly snarky comment. And then and then I talked to a friend and she's, this client asked me this. Well, what do you think?
Right.
And then my friend said, well, why don't you just ask her what she meant? Huh. All right. And so I went back because I had
Right.
assumed what she meant.
Yeah.
I had assumed her intention. I went back and I said, hey, what did you mean by that? And then her request was super reasonable.
Yeah.
And I just needed to step back, to pause, to talk it through with someone. And sometimes when we talk it through with people, then other people think that their role is just to validate us or to solve our problem. And it doesn't have to be either. Sometimes it's just, can you help me brainstorm different questions? Can you help me brainstorm different ways to see this? And people can hesitate to actually brainstorm different questions because they might think, oh, if I suggest different questions for you to ask, I'm invalidating you. No, it's right for me to feel I feel annoyed, that's what I feel,
Right.
and I also wanna move through this,
Yeah.
and, um, and so to your question of how do I know if I've got this compound question, it can help
Hmm.
to talk it through with someone else, and also I
Sure.
think time, because there's, I have this, sometimes what practicing curiosity, what can make it really difficult is our expectations, because we have certain expectations, and we don't
Right.
even realize we have those expectations until they're not met.
Yeah.
And then we're so fixated on, for example, what inclusion should look like for your daughter.
Hmm.
This is what it should look like. Why isn't she in this special
Yeah.
classroom? Or why doesn't she have access to this program?
Right.
And then we are so fixated on it that we don't actually we're not even open to exploring what's on the other side. And so it
Yeah.
creates this gap, and that gap can actually be bridged with curiosity.
Yeah. That's all great stuff. Another thing that came to mind when you're talking is I've several times or more than once where you're talking with somebody, you ask them a question. Let's say it's about inclusion. I ask a question about inclusion. I in my mind I have a certain when I say inclusion, it means a certain thing, but
Mm,
other people might not have the same definition meaning attached to it, and then you start talking and like, hey, I wanted to be included. Awesome, great, yes. And then you realize farther down the road that, well, that's what they're thinking. She's being included in their according to their definition, but it's not mine. So sometimes too, I feel like we need to certain words. We need to ask, what do you when I say inclusion? How do you interpret that? What do you mean by it? So we're on the same page to lead. To try to avoid those disagreements or being upset because they didn't do what we thought they were going to. So
absolutely. And so actually I have a book called The Seven Forms of Respect. And the
okay,
idea there is that we have different ways of seeing respect. We can agree on how it feels. We disagree on what does
yep,
it look like. And so the idea is to actually pause and to say, well, how do you want to be
right,
respected?
sure,
It's actually about getting curious about respect.
yeah,
But that also requires I need to know
yeah,
how I want respect. And a lot of people
Sure.
don't know. They haven't actually articulated it to themselves. They assume that that other people should know, and yet we've never articulated it even to ourselves.
That is interesting. So are you talking like, I mean, sometimes if people feel disrespected if people are late or that kind of thing, is that what you mean? Like being somebody shows up late, they feel disrespected? Is
Yeah,
that what
well,
you,
some people will feel that, and
yeah,
that can be, but actually punctuality, which is actually one of the forms of respect, that's relative. For some people that's important, for other
yeah,
people that's not important, and it doesn't mean that
right,
it's disrespectful. It just means that it's not important in the way that it's not important for me, and it might be
right,
important to someone else. And so
sure,
when I started my research on respect, I would ask people, well, actually my first question was, how do you want to be treated? And then people would talk about they would say, well, with respect. And I said, well, what does respect mean to you? And they said the golden rule. So treat people the way you want to be treated.
yep,
And so, but the problem with the golden rule is, what if they don't want to be treated the way you want to be treated?
right,
And so I actually have what I call the rubber band rule.
yep,
And so the rubber band rule is, it actually reflects how we want, how we can stretch for other people. So I know that you want to be respected in a certain way. And even though I'm kind of ambivalent,
hmm,
maybe maybe you want to be CC'd on all emails, and I'm kind of ambivalent. I wouldn't normally do that, but I know you like it, so I'll do that.
sure,
And then I'm in a group setting, and what happens is, if sometimes in a group setting I have to do things that I don't really like, but I know everyone else likes it.
yeah,
You know what happens over time when we're stretching and stretching and stretching? We snap and break
right,
like a rubber band. And so with the rubber band rule, it's about knowing, what are my internal breaking points? What is going to make me snap? And that's different for everyone.
yep,
And also, it can depend on the context, because maybe I know for me, my rubber band is way more stretchy at home than it is at work, right?
right.
So, and it's kind of about recognizing that there are going to be different factors that are influencing our stretchiness. And that really is about then self-respect.
Yeah, there's so much of it, so much of life comes down to like we need to know ourselves first. And
Mhm,
for me, honestly, I didn't. More recently, the last couple of years, I've been getting, doing more of that work. But it's
mhm,
stuff that's so important that I wish I would have done earlier. But just yeah, I mean, if I don't know about myself, it's hard to do a lot of the other things. So that's very
mhm.
important.
And sometimes we can only know more about ourselves when we're in relationship with other people and we're sharing how we're
Yes,
feeling. So that
right.
goes back to the first element, self-awareness. The second element is relationship building,
Yep.
because you can share something about yourself, and then I'm gonna comment or react, and
Yeah.
you're gonna learn something even more
Yeah.
in that.
That's
And it's reciprocal.
for sure. So why does diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI petrify people?
I think it petrifies people because people are afraid of offending people, of being wrong. And I think especially in our world right now that's so polarized, there's this expectation of right or wrong,
Right.
and it's black or white. And actually, I think that diversity, equity, inclusion in its truest form, and inclusion in its truest form, actually embraces nuance and embraces multiple perspectives, and that different uh, truths can coexist. And yet, I think that you see cancel culture, and that
Right.
scares people. That
Yeah.
really scares people. So when I work with, and also, by the way, I am not a DEI expert. I I tell people, and sometimes people think, "Oh, Julie, you are a woman of color who is in this leadership development, organizational development space. You must do DEI work." And as a small business owner, I say, "Well, if that's where your budget is and you're not asking me to change my content, then I'm okay with that. If that's where you want to categorize me." But actually, I think it's a true expertise and I don't want to claim that expertise, but I'll just comment on why I think it petrifies people, is
Sure.
because people are so scared of being canceled,
Right.
and they see other people. It kind of goes back to what I said earlier with you see how people get outraged over certain questions. And so, for example, I hear people say, it's not my, talking around DEI, it's not my job to educate you.
Hmm.
Go find out yourself. Go read about it on your own. And I think my response to that is, I'm not looking for an education. I'm looking for engagement. I'm looking for a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not just looking to learn from you. I'm hoping that you think that you have something to learn from me. And if we don't have that reciprocity, then I don't, then we shouldn't be in this. We're not engaging with one another. If you think that you only have something to teach me, and I can understand then why you would be exhausted because you don't think you have anything to learn from me.
Right.
And so curiosity, practicing curiosity requires this reciprocity. But going back to the why are people so scared? I'll give you an example. I remember once ta- uh, giving taking people through my framework of getting curious around respect, the 7 forms of respect.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end, someone said, and it was a white woman who said, "You've taught us how to ask questions. What I really want to know is how to answer them."
Hmm.
And that shows that people, they just want to know the right answer. And there's this fear around having that wrong answer.
Right.
And I think that respect actually illustrates this really well because the way we talk about respect is disrespect versus respect. If you don't respect me the way that I want, that means you're disrespecting me.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I'm gonna offer a reframe there. And the
Sure.
reframe is disrespect versus lack of respect in the forms that matter to me. And so disrespect, I think of disrespect as something that's intentional. I know you don't
Right.
like it and I did it anyway. Ha 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 ha.
Yep.
Right? But lack of respect in the forms that matter to me, maybe um, for example, punctuality is a big one. Maybe I don't think it's a big deal to be late, so I'm just treating you the way that I would treat myself, right?
Right.
So the golden rule. Or
Yep.
maybe we don't know each other that well, so I don't know what
Yep.
matters to you. Or maybe you said it's okay. All these times I've been late, you've condoned it. You said it's not a big deal.
Yep.
So I think it's not a big deal to you because you've told me that.
Right.
So when we're getting something that we don't like, we really have to pause and go, wait a minute, is this intentional
Yeah.
or do they just not know?
Yeah.
And and also I want to be really clear here. And then there are the things that are illegal, right? Like they're like bullying, right?
Yeah.
Assault. That's
Yeah.
not disrespect. That's just illegal. So I there are things that I think are more black and white.
Sure. Absolutely. What is a real life MBA and how do you get one?
So this is where I mentioned earlier that I came back to work at my family's Vietnamese
Yep.
newspaper, and that was during the Great Recession in 2008. So I decided that I was, instead of going back to school, I would learn all the things that not everything that I can learn in business school, but the business
Yeah.
essentials by running a small business. And I actually think that if you want to learn anything, in terms of business, just put that money into a business. You don't have to put $100,000 into getting an MBA. So when I worked at my small newspaper, I learned how to sell, how to do marketing, how to do operations. My brother and I actually bought half the newspaper from our parents, so we learned how to write a business plan and to take out a loan. I
Mm-hmm.
remember the first time I talked to an ad agency and they asked me all these questions and I didn't know how to answer. And it was so humiliating. And I got off the phone and I said to myself, "I'm really bad at this right now, but in a couple of years, I'm gonna get good." And you know
Right.
why? I had to. I
Right.
had to get good
Yep.
because there were people's livelihood on the line. I had a conversation recently with a friend's husband who was considering getting an MBA, and he is self-described very anxious, super introvert, and
Mm-hmm.
he had developed this technology at home, just being from his home office.
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, why do you want to work on other people's schedules? Do you want to do tests and homework? Do you
Yeah.
want to do group projects?" And he said no to each question. And I said, "Well, I think you could just take that $100,000 and invest it back in your business because your business is successful. And
Right.
you can reach out to professors that you want to get connected to and tell them what you've done because they'll respond to you." And they did.
Yeah. So do you think there's also a thing as getting a real life PhD?
Oh, yes, and I got a real life PhD too when I told you about those 5 cohorts that I ran.
Yep.
That was my official PhD is in history, modern intellectual Southeast Asian history. I feel that my second real life PhD was in organizational development, and that was by learning how people collaborate and how curiosity can play a role in that.
Yeah. That's great because I mean I have a master's, and I've thought several times about getting a PhD, but I'm like, man, it's a lot of money, and like, what would I actually do with it? Like, so that's a for
No,
me. So what would you suggest for me? Because I kind of was thinking about getting one in like disability studies. So in my situation, instead of actually getting a PhD, like what things would you suggest for me to
so I
head
want
down
to
that path?
differentiate between learning and getting a degree. So
Yeah,
if you need to get a degree because a degree is required for you to have a certain
right.
job,
Yep,
then yes, you have to go get that degree. But if you just want to learn, then I would say, what is that topic you want? Imagine if you were to write an article, if you were to write a thesis, how would
sure.
you go about doing that research? There are ways to learn how to do the research. You can still actually reach out to experts in the field. And a lot of times in academia, people don't read their work. And so they're always flattered. Like, you read my work? You
Okay,
want to reach out to me?
sure.
So just
Yeah,
show genuine interest in their work and ask those questions, and they will have conversations with you.
right. Yeah, there is really no reason I would need the degree. So yeah, that's part of my holdup. I think is like I could do it probably, but like it's not. I mean, I don't need it for a job. So why spend all the money and all that effort
No,
to get it? So that
I can
makes
tell
sense.
you now, I mean, education, I got my PhD in 2008. Education has changed so much that
Okay.
unless you need the degree, I think that there's so many different ways to
Yeah,
get educated.
for sure. How do you think we can use empathy to be more inclusive?
It's it's trying to understand how other people are feeling will then help us with that. I mean, I I remember my friend had an accident and I took her around and she had to then we were at a conference and she had to be in a wheelchair.
Sure.
And so I actually was the one who, even though we were both conference attendees, I was the
Mm-hmm.
one who wheeled her around that weekend. And there were
Yeah.
things I'll never unsee.
Yeah.
The how to navigate, oh, where are the elevators? How do we move through this building? And so there was one hand for her as for the person in the wheelchair, but also for me as the helper. People
Mm-hmm.
didn't think I was a conference attendee. They thought I was her
Right.
aid, and that gave me
Yeah.
a lot of empathy too
Right.
for being the person who's doing the caregiving. So, and that that even that experience in itself has helped influence how I think about disabilities.
Yeah. That's great. I saw you did a TEDx talk earlier this year, maybe.
Mhm. Yes, I
How?
did it last fall.
Okay. How was that for you?
Yes, it was great. It was on curiosity as a practice, and so what I mentioned to you about the gap between
Yep.
our expectations and what we get and how do we cross it with curiosity, that's what I talked about, and so the experience was transformational because I knew that going in, all that coaching would really help me refine my ideas.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've given two TEDx talks. 10 years ago, I gave my first one on inclusion, and then earlier this year, I gave another one. So yeah, the first they were both I would say life changing experiences for me. So
Mhm.
it's
Did you
it's
get a
pretty
lot of
fun.
good coaching?
So the first one I got a lot of good coaching. We went probably like for the month before we went and would like give our talk and then they would give suggestions and stuff. So that one was a lot of that. The second one there wasn't any of that, but the first one there was a lot of definitely coaching and like talk gave a talk. Hey, try this. Use these words. Pause more. So that was a lot of fun getting like the
Mhm.
coaching on how to deliver it and stuff for sure.
Yeah,
So
I ended up having 3 coaches. One they
okay,
gave me, and then one who volunteered, and uh, one who another person who volunteered. One was on
sure,
content, one was a generalist, and one was on just presentation. And then
yeah.
I actually reached out to my community and I said, "Can you help me get feedback?" And so I actually got feedback from 70 people
Oh
through the
wow,
process.
that's
I'm
cool.
a feedback hound.
Yeah,
So I'm always really interested in the different ways people will interpret
right.
things. And so it was a transformational experience for
Yeah.
me.
It's because you're curious, right?
It's so interesting the way that people notice different things.
Yeah.
Mhm,
Yeah, it is interesting for sure.
mhm.
What is one tip you can share to help the listeners be more inclusive today? Just something they can do starting today, something easy.
I think starting with yourself. Next time you have a reaction to something and you're feeling annoyed,
Yeah.
just to pause and go, what was my expectation? Why am I
Mhm.
feeling this? What's the emotion that I'm feeling here? And then come back a week and ask yourself, because that the initial feelings versus a little time away
Right.
can can help us have more clarity.
Sure. Is there anything you want to talk about that we haven't discussed yet?
I think we covered a lot. This was a really efficient conversation.
Yeah.
So, no,
Great.
thank you so much. We went through curiosity, we went through
Yeah.
respect, we went through my personal background, entrepreneurial background as well.
You ready for the final question?
Yes,
Do you like spam? Yes or no?
I haven't spam musabi. Yes, yes, I like it in spam musabi.
Yeah. I've never had it that way.
That's the only way I've had it. So I can't actually tell you if I like it other ways.
Where's the best place for everybody to connect with you?
So I'm really active on LinkedIn. You can find me
Okay.
there. You can find me at Julie Pham PhD, or you can find me at CuriosityBased. You can also check out my website, CuriosityBased or formsofrespect.com.
Awesome. Thank you so
Oh,
much
and
for
I'm
being
also
on.
really active on YouTube too. I have lots of
Okay.
videos there.
Okay. Awesome. I'll link that stuff in the show notes. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah. To all of you listening, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Inclusive Dad Podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, rate, or review the show. Your feedback helps us connect with more champions of inclusion. Remember to share this podcast with friends and family who might benefit. If you want to support us in our mission, please click on the link in the show description. Together we can make the world more inclusive. Until next time, stay empowered and be a champion for inclusion.